Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garakapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhay.
I summon the ancient spell. Reveal your worlds. Every story has a world.
Forward. Luther remarked that it had been a long time since their last meeting, but Felix brushed aside the pleasantries and instead questioned whether they dared show him respect while abandoning their duties to indulge in factional squabbles. Placing a hand over his heart, Luther swore he would never forget the lessons Felix had taught him, and clarified that he had not come to see the Duke at all, but rather his guests, the MacLean family. When Felix asked their purpose, Luther hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, while Wicked stepped in to admit he had arrived for the same reason, and had no desire to displease the Sword Duke. Turning his back to them, Felix relayed their request to Logan and asked whether he wished to meet them. Logan stepped forward without hesitation and replied that it would be an honor. With his hand over his heart, he greeted the two superhumans respectfully, stating it was a privilege to meet individuals he had long admired. Yet the reaction he received was strange. Both men looked at him with clear disinterest, appearing not to recognize him at all. They exchanged glances, silently sharing the same thought. Before addressing him in a dismissive tone, they admitted they had heard about the Sword Duke's disciple, and that it was pleasant to meet such talent, but clarified that their visit had nothing to do with him. Instead, they had come to see his father, Patrick MacLean, leaving both Logan and Patrick stunned. Patrick stepped forward, coughing lightly to announce himself, confusion flickering in his eyes. He greeted them respectfully as the kingdom's superhumans, and explained that Logan was currently managing the family's affairs, suggesting they continue the discussion with him. Hearing this, Luther and Wicked shifted their focus back to Logan, their earlier indifference replaced by a calculating gleam. Luther observed that for someone so young to manage an estate meant he was not only strong, but intelligent, while Wicked added with thinly veiled insincerity that speaking with promising young talent was always enjoyable, maintaining a polite facade. Logan thanked them for the compliments and asked what business they had with his family. The two men exchanged another look before proceeding. Luther praised Logan's directness, saying it suited his youth, while Wicked suggested they avoid wasting time. He then bluntly stated that since Logan had recently fought Beffrose of the Second Prince's faction, he should take this opportunity to pledge loyalty to Prince Reuter. Doing so would ensure the Second Prince's support for the MacLeans, especially considering Logan's uncle-in-law, Kairos, already belonged to that faction. Logan's expression remained carefully neutral, revealing nothing. Luther then argued that hostility between neighboring territories served no purpose, and proposed that swearing loyalty to Prince Romain instead would secure favorable arbitration in the dispute with Beffrose. Resting a heavy hand on Logan's shoulder, a gesture that felt more possessive than friendly, he urged him to choose, suggesting that peaceful neighbors benefited everyone. Logan instantly recognized the statement as a veiled threat. There was truth behind it as well. Castle Tomato bordered Luther-Cal's trade city, meaning Luther could disrupt commerce, incite unrest, or fabricate justification for open conflict if he wished. Yet Logan had no intention of joining any faction, not yet. He understood that siding with the First Prince might allow the Second Prince to conceal the war against Beffrose and ignite a larger civil conflict, while aligning with the Second Prince could provoke Markwell Kalia into launching an invasion under the pretext of insult. Either choice was a trap carefully designed to create justification for war. Refusing both offers was the only path forward, a delicate balance of diplomacy and patience. Lowering his head, Logan extended his hand respectfully and apologized, explaining that the complexities of the situation prevented him from making a hasty decision and that careful deliberation was necessary. At that moment, Felix intervened, his patience clearly exhausted. His voice rang with restrained fury as he demanded to know what they thought they were doing. The two superhumans visibly faltered, their arrogance dissolving into unease. Felix called their conduct pathetic, pointing out that they had abandoned subtlety entirely and resorted to issuing an ultimatum, attempting to bully his ward into submission. Worse still, they had dared involve his disciple, a line they never should have crossed. Wicked hurriedly insisted their intentions had nothing to do with Logan's status as Felix's student, and that they were merely presenting a business proposal to the MacLean household. Luther added that they had no wish to disregard Felix's will and only hoped to discuss the future with the family. Their voices had noticeably softened, fixing them with a piercing gaze. Felix asked whether they were absolutely certain this matter would not involve him. Both men straightened like soldiers under inspection and swore it would not. After silently studying them, Felix turned away and declared that this was as it should be, as he was returning to his study and had no intention of entangling himself in factional disputes, sensing something significant. Wicked asked what he meant. Felix then announced his decision starting that very day. He would no longer participate in the factional war. Whether through Logan or anyone else, they were to abandon all thoughts of drawing him in. The two men exchanged yet another look, clearly recalculating their next move, before stating they would relay his decision exactly as given to their respective princes. Logan exhaled inwardly, relieved. However, before leaving, Wicked Kelia turned toward him, with a faint menace in his voice, and told him to think carefully before making his decision, adding that they would meet again soon. Logan nodded calmly, acknowledging the warning. Luther followed by remarking that in some ways the situation might prove fortunate for the MacLeans. He explained that had they attacked Beffrose after the funeral, his prince would not have entertained negotiations at all, implying that their timing had forced a more measured response. Realizing the implication, Logan feigned gratitude and replied that this was indeed a relief. As the two departed, Logan watched them go with narrowed eyes before lowering his head, genuinely relieved by their absence. Even a simple conversation with them had been exhausting, their presence suffocating. Felix then asked whether Logan intended to involve himself in the faction war, noting he had not outright refused their offers. Logan answered that it was a possibility he might consider if circumstances demanded it. A carefully ambiguous reply. He apologized, admitting the MacLeans lacked the strength to cling to ideals under such pressure. Yet regardless of the path he chose, he intended to preserve his honor. Felix found himself momentarily speechless at Logan's pragmatism and resolve. After a pause, he nodded with faint respect and said that was enough. Turning away, he instructed Logan to return and rest, reminding him that the funeral would begin soon. Outside the palace, the king's coffin was carried through the gardens toward the grand entrance. As the pallbearers carefully maneuvered the casket inside, a somber announcement echoed across the hall, declaring the arrival of His Majesty's remains. The coffin was then solemnly brought toward the altar, where the 8 pallbearers gently placed it down. Clad in ceremonial robes, the archbishop ascended the steps toward the podium with his disciples flanking him, fully prepared to begin the funeral rites. The archbishop raised his head to address the assembled nobles, but the moment his eye scanned the hall, his expression shifted from solemn composure to visible dismay. The scene before him was deeply disrespectful. Instead of mourning the deceased king, the attendees whispered endlessly among themselves, their conversations filled with political maneuvering and veiled threats. The two princes sat with boredom written across their faces, casting indifferent glances at the coffin as though they would rather be anywhere else. Their grandfathers mirrored this attitude. Only 2 individuals seemed genuinely affected by the king's passing: the Sword Duke, Felix Esperanza, and the third prince, whose youthful face was clouded with sincere grief. Watching this disgraceful spectacle from beside his father, Logan felt disbelief and disgust churned within him, unable to comprehend how so many had chosen power games over honoring the dead. As the archbishop announced the beginning of the prayer, Logan noticed that even the holy man appeared unsettled by the blatant disrespect filling the chamber. Nevertheless, the archbishop proceeded with a lengthy eulogy, recounting the king's life from 40 years prior up to the present in painstaking chronological detail, a narration that stretched almost unbearably long given the tense atmosphere. In the midst of this drawn-out speech, Logan suddenly felt someone lean closer to him. Beffrose quietly warned him that he had only 1 week left and advised him to enjoy himself while he still could, implying that despair at the end would serve no purpose. Logan was taken aback both by the threat and by the fact that he had been seated beside such an unprincipled man. Briefly wondering who had arranged the seating, maintaining his composure, Logan leaned toward Beffrose and calmly informed him that he had recently been approached by the opposing faction, suggesting that they might eventually stand on the same side, and that Beffrose, before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Pie grow naturally. Would be wise to watch his words. Befros reacted with immediate disbelief and indignation, struggling to process what he had just heard. Logan then added that if Befros doubted him, he could confirm it with Marcus Luther Cal himself. The mere mention of Cal intensified Befros' anger, only for Logan to reveal moments later that he had been joking. Befros' face twisted with rage, his body trembling as he barely restrained himself. Internally, he fumed at Logan's audacity, reminding himself that he needed to maintain composure until the funeral concluded. Once it was over, he intended to go directly to Duke Felix. Fixing Logan with a murderous glare, he branded him an arrogant boy in his thoughts and vowed that no one who touched what was his would escape unscathed. A silent promise of retaliation. Around the chamber, reactions remained sharply divided. The first and second princes, though outwardly composed, were unmistakably bored, their attention wandering, completely unconcerned with the proceedings. Only the third prince and Felix appeared sincerely distressed, refraining from tears, yet radiating suppressed anger at the disrespectful behavior surrounding them. At long last, the archbishop concluded his extensive eulogy, and formally announced that the first day of the national funeral rites had been completed inside Logan's lodging inn, the capital of the Grandia Kingdom. Logan reflected that the first day of the national funeral rites had finally concluded. Both he and Patrick appeared exhausted, wiping sweat from their faces after enduring the long ceremony. As Logan caught his breath, he found it hard to believe that the rites had stretched from morning until evening. Even worse, just as he had anticipated, the moment the proceedings ended, vassals from both factions swarmed around them, pestering them relentlessly until the very last moment. Turning them down repeatedly had begun to feel like a tiresome chore. Patrick, who had been quietly observing his son from behind, finally spoke and asked whether Logan intended to make use of either faction. Logan turned toward his father and remained silent for a brief moment before asking if Patrick was worried. Patrick admitted honestly that if things continued this way, their family would be placed in serious danger, regardless of which faction they leaned on. The strength of one would be necessary to stop a Befros invasion, which remained their highest priority. Logan responded that, if absolutely necessary, they could rely on his master to resolve the situation, though he quickly added that such help would not be required, because they would settle the matter themselves before it came to that. His confidence left Patrick momentarily speechless, wanting clarity. Patrick asked what Logan had planned, and Logan simply told him to step into a certain room. When the door opened, a familiar voice greeted Logan, remarking that it had been a long time. Standing there was Philip, sweating profusely. Patrick stared in confusion, unable to understand why Philip was present, while Logan smiled quietly behind him and informed his father that he would soon witness the preparations he had made for the national funeral. 4 more days of funeral rites passed. By the 4th day, Logan's neck ached terribly, and the ceremonies had grown so monotonous that he could barely tell whether it was the 4th day or the 5th. As he massaged his stiff neck, a man brushed past him and muttered an insult under his breath, labeling Logan a political bat, someone who would cling to whichever side appeared victorious. The man then added that Count Befros had been right about him before walking away. Watching the man depart, Logan reflected on Befros and let out a quiet huff, realizing he had been wondering why envoys from the factions had suddenly stopped approaching him. It now seemed obvious that Befros had been spreading words about him everywhere. Even so, Logan had no intention of joining any faction. While he was lost in thought, someone approached him enthusiastically and addressed him as son-in-law. It was Eileen's father. Looking around, the man asked why Logan was alone and inquired about his relatives, wondering if they had not attended. Logan explained that his father had returned to their lodgings first, prompting Eileen's father to send Patrick his regards. Then came the question no man ever wished to hear from his future-in-law. Eileen's father asked whether Logan had decided on a wedding date, attempting to evade the topic. Logan reminded him that his territory was currently facing a crisis. However, Eileen's father countered by pointing out that publicly announcing the bond between their families could help keep Befros in check. Logan replied that he could not make such a decision right now, especially since Eileen would likely scold him again for acting on his own. Curious, Eileen's father asked if this was Logan's first time. Logan wondered if he meant his first wedding, but his father-in-law clarified with amusement that if it were not his first assembly of nobles, the grand nobles gathering, he would not be sitting so quietly. Nearby, several nobles were engaged in conversation. One asked how long it had been since the last assembly, and another replied that officials had allowed even those below the rank of Roman Viscount to attend, adding that it had been quite some time since such access was granted. A third remarked that this only proved how shaken the royal family had been by the king's sudden passing. At that moment, someone struck the speaker's shoulder. It was Logan, who had apparently not intended the contact, but nonetheless caused the man to fall to the ground. Logan immediately apologized, yet the man shouted angrily, telling him to watch where he was going. Logan offered a hand to help him up and explained that it had not been intentional, but the man slapped his hand away and stormed off, calling Logan conceited. Patrick, who had witnessed the entire exchange, dismissed the man as irrational and told Logan not to worry about it. Logan agreed outwardly, yet his gaze lingered on the departing figure, clearly turning something over in his mind. As they prepared to enter the assembly, Logan reflected that in his past life, this event had taken place 2 weeks after the funeral. Now, thanks to Felix's declaration of neutrality, neither faction had any reason left to conceal their ambitions. Logan recalled that the Grand Nobles' assembly in his previous life had descended into complete chaos. The spark had been a Roman Viscount aligned with the First Princess faction, who, swept up by the rising tension, began hurling curses at Jordan Valterman. What started as a heated exchange soon escalated as middling aristocrats clashed, the conflict spiraling out of control, until even the superhumans were drawn into open combat. The catastrophe became known as the Split of the Tongue that failed the country, an incident that marked the beginning of the Civil War, and the Roman Viscount responsible was condemned for generations. Back in the present, events seemed to be unfolding along a similar path. One Viscount was already locked in a fierce argument with another, insisting that no one but His Highness Romain was fit to become king. His opponent countered that such a claim was absurd. While the first prince still lived, the supporter of the first prince questioned whether his rival possessed any honor toward a superior, only to be told that superiority meant nothing, when the age difference between the princes amounted to mere months. The first Viscount angrily demanded that the man restrain his tongue. Meanwhile, the two princes appeared irritated by the entire spectacle, deliberately avoiding each other's gaze. A judge listening to the debate lowered his head, uncertain how to intervene. Watching the scene, Logan thought that at this rate, it would not be surprising if someone snapped and triggered violence. In his previous life, the Assembly's brawl had been followed by a period of military preparation, and within a month or two, the first battle of the Civil War had erupted. That timeline, however, was far too slow for Logan's purposes, as it would grant Bifrost ample opportunity to crush his family during the preparation period. Clenching his fist, Logan resolved that the Civil War needed to ignite sooner, leaving no time for anyone to prepare. His gaze drifted toward the Viscount he had brushed against on his way into the assembly, the same man now passionately advocating for the second prince. The Viscount argued that the outdated tradition of prioritizing the eldest son had long been abandoned, and that the right to the throne should be determined by ability. By that measure, he proclaimed, Prince Romain, who had successfully resolved trade issues with the empire, was the most suitable candidate. Romain responded with a pleased smile as others voiced their agreement, acknowledging the truth in the Viscount's claims. Another noble, Count Clet, was confronted and asked what nonsense was being spoken, but the Count calmly reiterated that no one was more devoted to state affairs than Prince Romain. As he continued speaking, however, blood suddenly began streaming from his nose. Fear flickered across his face while his opponent stood speechless, asking what was wrong. The Count clutched his head, his eyes changing color as his balance faltered. He swayed from side to side before collapsing onto the ground. Panic rippled through the assembly, as those loyal to him called desperately for a priest. Logan and Patrick appeared shocked by the sudden turn of events, yet Logan alone recognized the truth: the man was no longer breathing. The poison he had administered was proving devastatingly. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Effective. The toxin was derived from Lethe grass. When infused with force and dried for 3 days to concentrate its properties, the herb transformed into a lethal poison, capable of triggering a cerebral vascular hemorrhage. This secret would not be uncovered until 15 years later, when the Grandier Liberation Front discovered it while searching for methods to assassinate the empire's ruling elite. Anticipating this moment, Logan had instructed Philip days earlier to procure the necessary herbs by attaching a tiny needle to his ring. He had discreetly injected the poison into the count before the meeting began. While knights or magicians would likely withstand such a toxin, against an ordinary aristocrat, it was unstoppable. This man, known by the codename Parasite, had been the 9th assassination target of the Grandier Liberation Front in Logan's previous life. Now Logan intended to sever that tenacious threat early, eliminating the future traitor before he ever had the chance to sell out the country. Lifting his eyes, Logan studied both princes, aware that only one question truly mattered now: how would they respond to this sudden death? Romain, in particular, looked utterly infuriated. Instantly, two men stepped forward to remove the lifeless body of the poisoned Viscount. Watching the scene unfold, the first prince appeared uncertain about what had just happened, while the second prince burned with fury. Once the body was carried away, Romain turned toward his brother and demanded to know whether he truly dared to poison one of his subordinates. Reuter dismissed the accusation at once, reasoning that he had nothing to gain from killing his own supposed traitor and insisting that the act could not have been his doing. He then redirected the suspicion toward Romain, questioning who would be foolish enough to believe such a poorly staged farce. Romain stood stunned, unsure whether Reuter's response stemmed from calculated strategy or sheer audacity in calling the incident a fabrication. At that moment, another Viscount rose and argued that Romain's accusation was unreasonable, pointing out that they did not even know why Count Clet had collapsed in the first place. Yet another noble interrupted, questioning the source of Romain's anger, and noting that it had been Romain himself who first accused Reuter of poisoning the victim. Perhaps provoked by the mention of the word traitor, the Roman sixth count who had spoken earlier was left speechless before snapping back, demanding silence, and asking if the man had forgotten where they were. Soon, chatter spread across the assembly hall as voices overlapped and tensions climbed. Observing the situation, Logan recognized that two particular nobles were clashing first, much like the hostility between Logan and Bafros. Their families were infamous northern rivals, and the resemblance extended further, as one house was led by a knight and the other by a mage. The blonde noble threatened Count Roxina, asking if he was courting death, while Count Clowie replied that such a fate was exactly what he sought. Trying to restore order, the judge struck his gavel repeatedly, warning them that fighting within the assembly would be madness. Yet as he looked closer, the gravity of the situation dawned on him, or as were flaring throughout the hall as nobles prepared themselves for battle. Alarmed, the judge demanded to know what was happening, but the realization caused him to drop his gavel altogether. Then a commanding voice rang out, ordering everyone to halt. Heads turned toward the entrance as the speaker stepped inside and urged the assembly to calm themselves, insisting that the matter must be properly investigated to uncover the truth, rather than decided through emotion. The man was none other than Felix. He declared firmly that such a situation required reason and procedure. Logan noted that Felix had arrived with impeccable timing, though the circumstances were far from easily controlled. The princes themselves began shouting again, with Romain arguing that the situation was obvious and demanding to know what further procedures Felix could possibly require. Reuter, however, expressed strong agreement with the Duke, claiming that Romain had lacked any real justification and had instead staged the incident to dispose of a useless pawn. Romain fired back, questioning how Reuter could speak so boldly after orchestrating such an underhanded assassination, while Reuter countered that if Romain were truly innocent, he should welcome an investigation. Felix stepped forward, urging both princes to calm down, but his path was suddenly blocked by two imposing figures, Jordan and Juan. Their presence clearly caught him off guard. Jordan warned Felix not to interfere, while Juan added that even he would struggle against the two of them together. Felix questioned whether they understood the chaos they were allowing to unfold, yet neither appeared moved by his words. Witnessing this confrontation, Patrick wondered how matters had deteriorated so badly. Realizing that the kingdom's three sole dukes now stood in direct conflict, Juan remarked that Felix must know how pointless an assembly like this had become, and Jordan suggested that reaching a conclusion through force might not be such a terrible outcome. Watching the princes argue, Felix muttered that everyone had lost their senses. At last, Romain clenched his teeth and pointed directly at Reuter, declaring that he no longer recognized him as a brother. He asserted that only one method remained to determine who possessed the rightful claim to the throne: strength. Reuter responded with laughter before raising his hand and signaling for his followers to summon their forces. Romain mirrored the gesture, announcing that they would wait no longer, and ordering his supporters to take up arms and prepare for war. As the hall descended into open division, Juan and Jordan knelt before their respective lords in a clear display of allegiance. Behind them stood Felix, silent and trembling, and I'm not even sure what his expression says about this. You can tell me in the comments. After the assembly concluded, a carriage stood waiting outside the palace. Inside, Jordan was speaking with Roger Beffros. Beffros requested additional time to finish dealing with the Mechlins, but as he spoke, Jordan's grip tightened around his own arm. Jordan pointed out coldly that war could erupt at any moment, yet Beffros was still asking for time. Realizing his misstep, Beffros straightened immediately. He reflected that Jordan's title, the Blazing Heat Sword, represented only his strength on the surface, while in truth, he was a frigid and calculating man who would tolerate no wrong answers. Lowering his head, Beffros asked for merely 10 days, insisting it would not take long. Jordan dismissed the request as inefficient, leaving Beffros uncertain how to respond. Jordan then explained that the most efficient solution would have been to bring the Mechlins into their faction, thereby adding their forces intact. Beffros was left speechless. Jordan revealed that he had even sent Luther for that purpose, though someone had warned that the Mechlins were too rotten to accept. At this, Beffros begged forgiveness, admitting that greed had clouded his judgment and led him to commit an unforgivable mistake. After a moment of silence, Jordan instructed Beffros to suppress his greed for now. Once the larger war was won, he promised to deal with the Mechlins personally and deliver them to Beffros's doorstep. Turning his head slightly, Jordan added that he would issue the Mechlins a mild warning, advising Beffros not to worry, but instead to summon his finest troops immediately. The bigger picture demanded their focus. Several days later at Castle Tomato, matters were unfolding swiftly. Logan and Patrick communicated through an orb with a representative of the Walter Mean Duchy. The message conveyed that Logan's desire to remain neutral would be respected. However, if he reversed his stance or took provocative action, severe punishment would follow. After the warning was delivered, Patrick bowed slightly and stated that he had taken his Grace's words to heart before ending the communication. The messenger expressed hope that this attitude would continue. Patrick muttered irritably that the man had not even offered a proper farewell and questioned the arrogance of such a messenger. Logan remarked calmly that such behavior was fitting for the Walter Mean Duchy. He added that despite the situation, they had nothing to fear and would not need to rely on Felix. Patrick stroked his beard thoughtfully, reasoning that if the warning held true, Beffros would be gathering forces and moving toward the capital instead of attacking them. Given the present turmoil, they might finally have time to rest. Logan agreed, suggesting they focus on what they could control. The civil war sparked by Larry Klett's death. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Up High grow naturally. Escalated rapidly. Within a week, physical confrontations erupted. Initially, both factions had considered assassinating the opposing prince, but while their conscripted forces mobilized, they crossed paths unexpectedly. A line of battle stretched from the northern territories to lands directly controlled by the crown, and spontaneous clashes broke out across the kingdom, signaling a prolonged conflict. Both sides began drawing out every ounce of strength they possessed. Beffros, compelled by circumstance, moved to the central front, leaving only minimal forces at his main castle. As he marched to war, he reassured himself that the Mechlins would not dare defy the Duke's warning, though he privately questioned Logan's sanity. Back at Castle Tomato, Logan struck the table decisively and declared that they must seize this opportunity to occupy Beffros's lands. Hinckley, Dwayne, and Patrick reacted in disbelief. Convinced Logan had lost his mind, Dwayne asked whether he intended to ignore a direct warning from a superhuman. Logan confirmed that he would. Dwayne fainted outright, caught by Hinckley, who warned that even if Beffros could not retaliate during this civil war, their move might be interpreted as a challenge to the second prince, potentially making them an example to deter other neutral forces. Logan countered firmly that their conflict with Beffros had begun before the Civil War, making it a private family war rather than a factional challenge. Both the second prince and Duke Walter Mean would understand. Hinckley wondered whether Logan had foreseen these events when he seized Castle Tomato, though he quickly dismissed the idea of Logan seeding the future. Logan merely laughed. Patrick intervened, cautioning that even if Logan were correct, Walter Mean might hold him accountable later. Logan admitted he had not considered that possibility, surprising Hinckley, before asserting that Walter Mean would not act against them, provided they succeeded in taking Castle Beffros and growing strong enough to become valuable to both factions. The notion left everyone stunned. Patrick dismissed Dwayne and Hinckley to speak privately with his son. Once alone, he pointed out a fatal flaw in Logan's reasoning. For that plan to succeed, the Civil War would need to last long enough for them to occupy Beffros and grow stronger. Logan appeared taken aback that Patrick had discerned this assumption. Patrick observed that civil war is rarely lasted beyond a year, yet the Grandia Civil War had endured 3 years, making it an anomaly Logan might be relying upon too heavily. After a moment, Patrick's sighting closed his eyes, reminding Logan that he trusted his actions were always for the family's benefit. However, he urged him to account for such blind spots in the future. Logan acknowledged the advice. Standing before the massive glass windows, Patrick concluded that their only remaining course was to occupy Beffros's territory, reclaiming the lands of their forefathers. At the gates of the main castle of Beffros, 2 guards stared into the distance after spotting something unusual, and the one holding the binoculars was left completely speechless. A massive army was storming toward the castle, and it was not just any force, it was the McLeans. One soldier atop the walls shouted for everyone to hold their ground, while another reassured the defenders that a message had already been sent to Perida, and that reinforcements would arrive soon, meaning they only needed to endure until then. Observing the situation, Logan concluded that the defenders had no intention of surrendering peacefully. Patrick responded that there was no need to prolong the battle as a figure stepped forward atop the walls. Logan gave the order to capture the castle immediately, and the troops voiced their understanding. Suddenly, a voice rang out declaring that his lord had departed to fight in the war that would determine the nation's fate, entrusting him with the honorable duty of standing as the final line of defense. The man claimed to have heard many things about Logan, and vowed to repay the disgrace of Castle Tomato being stolen. The speaker revealed himself as Lentor, a high-ranking knight, and with a downward swing of his sword, he issued a formal challenge, demanding a duel between knights. He declared that if Logan truly considered himself a knight, he should answer the challenge, otherwise he would bring shame upon himself. Logan, however, privately judged that Lentor was the one disgracing himself. In the next instant, a punch slammed into Lentor's purple-haired face, blood bursting from his nose as he collapsed. Logan realized he had knocked the man out with his bare fist without even thinking. Standing behind the fallen knight was Hinckley. Logan asked about Lentor's condition, and Hinckley casually informed him that the man had fainted, even nudging his face with a boot. Logan found it unbelievable that a supposed high-ranking knight had collapsed from a single punch, while Hinckley wondered if Beffros had truly lost his senses to leave such an all-talk commander in charge of the defenses. Logan turned toward his father to announce that it was over, yet Patrick seemed completely absorbed in the sight before him. When Logan tried again to get his attention, Patrick murmured that this was the land of their forefathers, the very territory from which they had been driven out 2 centuries ago. Gazing down upon it, he reflected on how no one could have imagined they would reclaim it so easily. Logan smiled at his father, but quietly corrected the thought, reminding him that it had not been easy. Together, they looked back at their people, Hinckley, Ronion, Victor, and every soldier, each smiling beneath the radiant sky. As Patrick looked at Ronion and Hinckley, realization dawned upon him. Drawing in a deep breath, he announced that he finally understood. Addressing everyone, he praised their efforts, declaring that the McLeans had reclaimed the land of their ancestors, thanks entirely to their hard work. He expressed how blessed he felt to have such vassals, yet he reminded them that this place must serve not only as recognition of their victory, but also as sacred ground to honor the men who had fallen along the way. Patrick bowed his head and vowed never to forget the knights who had brought them there. He began reciting their names one by one: Caleb, Nil, Ethan, Curtis, Rariner, Androdus, Piero, and the list continued. Logan was stunned that his father remembered every single name. He noticed Patrick gripping his sword tighter with emotion as he spoke, and Logan smiled quietly. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Patrick declared that those names would be engraved upon his heart forever. He then turned to Logan and stated that regarding the events yet to come, it would be best to hear from the future of the McLeans himself. Logan stepped forward, beside his father, sweat forming as he gathered his thoughts. He addressed the soldiers, stating that they had likely already realized it, but the world had descended into an era of chaos. In response, the McLeans would ride those winds of chaos and soar higher than ever before, raising Lux toward the sky. He called upon the men to become the wings of the McLeans. A knight immediately ordered a salute, and with hands placed over their hearts, the army hailed the glory of the McLeans. Meanwhile, in the war camp, Beffros could scarcely believe that his castle had fallen. He demanded to know what Perida and Lenter had been doing, only to be informed that the fortress had already been taken. Before Perida's forces could even mobilize, striking the air and fury, Beffros cursed Lenter as a fool and swore they would return immediately to crush the McLeans limb by limb. At that moment, Jordan Valtramine arrived and bluntly informed Beffros that he would do no such thing. Beffros attempted to justify himself, arguing that his homeland had been attacked by savages, but Valtramine questioned what would happen if Beffros withdrew his forces while both sides remained evenly matched at the central front. He demanded to know whether Beffros considered his personal lands more important than their greater mission. Beffros quickly denied such intentions, sweating with fear. Beffros insisted that the McLeans had ignored a direct warning, yet Valtramine coldly declared that he would tear them apart himself after their mission concluded. Before that, however, he intended to send a notice demanding the McLeans join their faction. When Logan received this message through the communication channel, he laughed it off and warned that if the McLeans were threatened, they would have no choice but to support the first. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Apai. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.